I think people are too immersed in day-to-day affairs, in the banality of everyday life, that they're not conscious of how insanely amazing it is to be alive.
I'm your host, Brian J. Roberts, and this episode is brought to you by Experian. If you've been following my work, you know that I've been lucky enough to interview some of the brightest minds of our time. Billionaires, rocket scientists, Academy Award winners, UFC champions, and so many more. And if there's one thing I learned over the years, it's that financial success isn't just about your income. It's also about your credit. And Experian Boost offers a quick and easy way to boost your credit score for free instantly. Here's how it works. All you have to do is sign up, link your bank accounts, and Experian Boost is going to increase your credit score based on your payments towards your utility bills, cell phone bill, and even streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, or Disney Plus. So if you want to boost your credit score for free, visit Experian.com/Brian J. Roberts. Robert, I was watching a Google talk that you gave back in July of 2019 where you were discussing the laws of human nature. And you mentioned in that talk that you were spurred to write the 48 laws because of some experiences you had in your own life. And I just love to learn a little bit more about what those experiences were that led you to writing the 48 laws of power.
Well, it was probably accumulation of many years of frustration and a little bit of bitterness and certainly a degree of anger. You put them all together, that was sort of the ingredients. And what that came from was largely I had worked in many, many different jobs. I mean, my girlfriend and I counted it something like over 60 different jobs before I started writing books. And I had seen all kinds of power games and power moves and people being very manipulative. Not everybody, certainly not everybody, but just a small percentage of people that'll go away. Hold on a second. It's a small percentage of people, but enough to make life miserable and to make my life miserable. To just give you an example, I was working for a television show whose name I shall not mention in the late 80s, and I was doing research. And my job was to find stories for the show. And, your reputation, your success depended on how many of your stories actually got filmed because there was a team of researchers. And I'm not bragging because I have many things I'm not good at, but I was by far the best person there. My stories were, the percentage was very high. And lo and behold, several months into the job, I was called into the office and I was going to be fired. And I was like, what is it that I've done? And they'd give, I can't even remember what the reason was. It was something about showing up late or not coming to this event or whatever. And it was very disturbing to me. And then I realized later on, as time went by, that I had violated law number 1 of the 48 laws of power: never outshine the master. And I worked in Hollywood, and I had a lot of painful experiences similar to that, where things went into the 48 laws, like always get other people to do the work, but take the credit for it. That kept happening to me, So I was essentially I was at this point where I met a man who asked me if I had an idea for a book, and I was really ready because I was a little bit depressed and my life wasn't going the direction I thought it should be going. And I spewed out in this pitch to him all of these frustrations, all of these stories, and he got very excited about it. But basically, I was able to channel a lot of because, there's a lot of self-help books out there, a lot of books about self-improvement, but to me, nobody ever discusses the reality of the fact that there are people who love power and they will do anything to get it, and they will put a knife in your back with a smile on their face. And if you're a naive person, which I count myself as one of them early in my career, it leads to some very painful moments that can drag on for years and create all kinds of emotional damage and make you skittish on your next project, your next job, and then go on and on and on and on. So I wanted to write a book that got rid of all of the bullshit in self-help genre and really expose what goes on in corporate offices with executives behind closed doors in Hollywood and business in politics, all down the line, and just sort of expose it so people could understand that this is how power operates and to not be so naive in the future.
It's almost as if people don't want to confront the reality of these principles, of these laws, because they're just so harsh. They're not comfortable. They're not easy to grapple with. And I think that they force us to look at ourselves and look at the dynamics of relationships all around us, up and down the hierarchies that we exist in everywhere, and confront a reality that we'd almost rather not, because it's not warm and fluffy and cozy at all. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's it's basically, I mean, there's just several things going on because when you realize that life can be kind of harsh, that people are competitive, that it's kind of a slightly ruthless environment out there, it's not a pleasant thought. You don't really want to necessarily think about that about people. But B, and probably the main reason, is that it now requires effort. So I talked in my book Mastery, my fifth book, about the need, if you're going to be a master at any career or any kind of job, you have to have social intelligence. And I wrote a chapter on that. And a lot of people don't understand that concept, that just as important as being able to know the technical side of your job, you also have to understand people on a high level. You have to observe them, you have to study them. People are extremely complicated. Algorithms and hacking and things, they're relatively simple compared to the insane complexity of people and their psychologies and how difficult and how unpredictable they are. And to do that, it's hard. It's not easy. It means you have to sit back and think about yourself, think about how you react emotionally to people. You have to study them. We want to think that we're just naturally gifted at understanding people. It's like the last thing we want to spend effort on, right? But if you don't spend effort on it, you're headed toward a life of misery, I'm telling you, because you're going to constantly have political problems. I do a fair amount of consulting, often in business, and I was on the board of directors of a publicly traded company. And then 95% of the time, CEOs or people, high-powered people, come to me because they have problems dealing with people, political problems.
Mm.
They hired the wrong business partner. They hired the wrong executives to work underneath them, and they were suffering, and they didn't know why, because they had blind spots. Because throughout their whole life, people were telling them, yes, your ideas are wonderful, particularly if you have power. Yes, your ideas are wonderful. I love you. And they become naive. They don't understand that people smile and say that they like you because you are the boss, not because they're being sincere. So it's like a blind spot that a lot of us have about that somewhat dark element in human nature, and it requires effort, and we don't want to expend effort, particularly in that area.
And just speaking of behavior more broadly, do you think that these changes you just mentioned have anything to do with this apparently traumatic shift we're seeing, and how people interact with each other, how the quality of discourse has seemed to just crumbled, and we seem unable to level with each other and be civil with each other? What do you think the cause is of that?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is people, I believe, have become more emotional and more irrational than they were maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I can speak from experience because I'm older. I'm now 61, so I've been through a lot of that. I think some of it, these things go in cycles, so it doesn't mean that in 30 years we're all going to be insane and then things are going to go off the deep end and all these conspiracy theories that are out there are just going to take over and people are going to become hyper irrational. I don't believe that these things go in cycles. But some of it comes through technology, social media. They've done studies. There was a study in Ann Arbor, University of Michigan, about levels of narcissism and self-absorption. They did studies of college students, and they demonstrated over a fairly long period of time that these levels are constantly rising. They had a way of measuring it. I don't remember what that was. But people have become more self-absorbed and less observant and less socially astute. So if you spend all of your time with your phone, you're not spending time interacting with people. I go to a restaurant before the pandemic when we used to go to restaurants, and you would see couples there, and they would both be looking at their smartphone and not paying attention to each other. And then occasionally they would laugh and they would show, look, honey, look what I just saw. you know, and so people have become kind of insensitive, not necessarily in a negative way. It's just, I mean, it's happened to, I put myself in that category too. I'm much to blame as others. But, you know, 150 years ago, you did not have television, you did not have the internet, you didn't even have the telephone. And your only source of distraction and pleasure was interacting with people. So people were very sensitive and very acute. You read a Jane Austen novel and you're amazed at how well people could read each other's psychology. These are skills that have become slowly degraded as we've all become more self-absorbed and technology has taken over. The other thing that social media has exacerbated beyond irrationality is our tribalism, our tribal instincts, which are very much ingrained in human nature. And I had, shut up, phone. God damn it. I'm so sick of this.
Never stops.
It doesn't. It's all fucking telemarketing. Pardon my language. It's all damn telemarketing. Anyway, deeply rooted in human nature is our tribal instincts, and there are very good reasons for that. So it's a part of our nature that's sort of always brewing beneath the surface. And throughout history, we see insane outbreaks of extreme tribalism. And so this has been brewing for a while as kind of in the past, I don't know if I should be going so much into this, but in the past we had large belief systems like Christianity or different religions. Then we had communism, capitalism. With all of that kind of disappearing, people don't have anything big to believe in anymore. So it's all kind of crumbled away. But humans have a need of believing in something and feeling attached to a group and to a party. And since that kind of has all crumbled, and social media feeds this, we can now kind of glom onto these little niches here, all in the virtual sphere, right? So that's become extremely exacerbated. Then suddenly the pandemic explodes 9 months ago, and all of these things that are brewing, the irrationality, the tribalism, and the other things, the self-absorption, are there, and they just become exponentially increased, because the pandemic is something that is guaranteed to work on our most irrational instincts. Because we can't see the enemy, we don't know where it's coming from, we don't know how to respond to it. We're told what to do. Yes, that makes sense. Socially distance, mask, But we're emotional creatures, and we have a great need to be around other people. And with all of, I'm sorry, this is just getting outrageous. And so with all of the, I'm showing my own irrationality, like I'm ready to take that phone and throw it in the toilet.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you put all this brew of things already there under the surface, and the pandemic just shoots it into the stratosphere, and it makes us more interested in the weirdest conspiracy theories. It makes us freaking out about the restrictions on our social life, which are actually very necessary. If we had listened to the experts and we had done this 6 months ago, like I was advocating, we'd be in a lot better position than we are now. On and on and on, and the self-absorption. So these are some of the factors that I think were there underneath the surface and now are just much more evident.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that's troubling is just how commonplace interruptions are now. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on what some practical steps are one could take to create a buffer between all of these interruptions, all of this noise, all of these distractions, and free ourselves really to refocus back in on the more important things in our lives. What do you think some of those practical steps would be that one could take?
Well, it's a very good point. the levels of distraction have just reached insane levels. I talk in Mastery about how the human brain is constructed. We're given this insanely powerful tool, the most complex organism or structure in the entire universe. The human brain is insane what it's capable of. But it has certain laws, certain things that you need to abide by. And one is when you have undivided attention to something, when you focus, when you concentrate, you are maximizing the powers of the human brain. So you take Albert Einstein, who certainly was, we agree now he's on a genius level, but when he was 16, 17, nobody thought he was a genius. He was actually a poor student or a mediocre student. He focused on this one theory, his theory of special relativity. For 10 years, that's all he thought about, thought experiments. People would see him walking, crossing bridges in Zurich, and he was like so absorbed he wouldn't even know where he was, He was just focusing in every single day on this one problem, and look what it led to. And you look at anybody who's a genius, who's successful at something, they have the ability to focus. And that was Steve Jobs' mantra. He said sometimes he would close the door when he had a particular problem. Nobody could interrupt him. And for several days, he would just sit there and think and focus and take notes and be alone. And people have lost that ability. You need to be able to figure out a problem, to solve it, to be creative. You have to be alone. You have to close the door. You have to not look at your Instagram account. You have to sit there and just computer or pen and paper or however your process is and deal with it. And I compare it to like a drill that's going into a piece of wood. And the more you drill down, the closer you get to reality. But if every few seconds, the phone's going off, you pull back, that drill just backs, it's not going anywhere because you're never digging deep enough into the problem. So what do? You have to first understand that you're not going to be successful in life. You're not going to get what you want if you become a slave of these technologies, a slave of these machines. You have to have a degree of control. Now, it's not easy, and I know the temptations. I'm not asking you to repress or never look at your accounts or never deal with social media. That's not possible, and it's not even necessarily good. But are you in control? So are you hooked by, these people who run Facebook and Instagram, so they're incredibly clever. They know marketing like Einstein knew relativity, right? And they know all the gadgets and the tricks for getting your attention and hooking you and making you addicted to checking out your feeds every day and to getting that like and getting people to respond. And so you're a slave, you're addicted. You have to understand that. So can you get control of it? It's like a horse that you're on top of. If you don't know how to hold the reins, that horse will just go anywhere. You have to be the rider. You have to be in a degree of control. So don't interact. Try and spend several days where you discipline yourself and you say, I will only check this particular social media outlet that I'm hooked on once a day. Wow, that seems so little. It's very painful. But try it. Just try it and see if you can do it and see how hard it is. And so get some discipline and control and the sense that you are the one who's riding that horse. You can guide it. You can use it for what you want. So that means a couple times a day, you're bored and distracted. Okay, you check it out. But generally, you're focused and you're attentive and you're not doing that. So when you do turn to social media, it feels like a relief. It doesn't feel like an addiction. And those are the simple things. I don't believe in drastic changes. You have to take baby steps. You have to regain that feeling that you are the master of this piece of technology, not the slave. And that will come slowly through day by day, finding some distance, not checking it out as much, not responding. And then look at yourself. If you post something on Instagram, for instance, you're now so nervous because you're expecting people to hit that like button or to respond to it, to see how many views you get. And you're hooked, and it's not healthy because your sense of self-worth shouldn't come from things like that. It should come from within. So monitor yourself and monitor your own emotional reaction to these things so that you can understand what they're doing to you, and how it's in some ways warping you psychologically. So these are kind of some small steps that I would advocate.
You know, it sounds like a big issue with this disconnection is maybe in some way people don't want to disconnect because spending that alone time, spending that time in solitude is uncomfortable. Sitting with yourself and your own thoughts and really listening to yourself can be uncomfortable. So what do you think some of the benefits are of this solitude that people may be avoiding or running away from?
Well, the in disconnecting, in gaining some degree of mastery, where you feel like, okay, today I did what Robert said. Instead of checking it out 12 times a day, whatever that is, I checked it out only 3. Yeah, wow, okay, it's a feeling of power, a feeling I have power. And that in alone, doing that will start to rebuild you, you know? But you're not, you, I keep advocating in my, certainly in my last book, the importance of awareness. You can't change yourself at all unless you're aware of who you are and aware of your habits and aware of your emotional addictions and aware of your weaknesses and your flaws. And so just simply observing yourself in the course of a day, I got to check that out. Okay, I noticed, wow, it's happening to me. I'm hooked. I'm not in control of this. That is a very powerful, the brain operates by these neural pathways that we lay over and over and over again. Habits are incredibly powerful. It's what you do when you're shooting a basketball or playing chess or learning anything or playing the piano. You're laying down these pathways so it becomes easier and easier and easier. You need to lay down neural pathways that are counter addictions, okay? And these are some of the things that you do day by day that will help rebuild you. After that, maybe you need some large projects in life. So, let's say you have a business idea that you want to start, and it's something that's you've been thinking about for a year or whatever. Your tendency may be to postpone it because you're not ready, because you think you're too young, you don't think you have the money, blah, 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 blah. And then you're constantly distracted and months go by and you've not let it happen. Taking on a project, like starting a business, like writing a book, like going back to school to get a degree in something that you cherish. There's nothing like that to focus the mind over long periods of time. And you get to feel rewards. So we don't do things, we humans, unless we feel a reward. We don't like pain just for the sake of pain. We may like to exercise and it's a bit painful, but we know there's a reward at the end. We feel better, we're stronger, etc. So there's got to be a reward in there. And the reward is you kind of gain mastery of yourself. Okay, now I'm going to take on some kind of project, writing something, being creative, starting a business, going back to school. Okay, now over the course of 2 or 3 months, you're having to focus deeply on something, and you start to see that, yeah, I'm changing. Yeah, this is exciting. So a new me is emerging here. And, I know that sounds like easy to say and obviously harder to put into practice. But you know it when you were a child, when you were a kid and you had to learn something, let's say a sport or a dance or the piano or some game or whatever it was. You knew that when you did it for several months, you got better at it. And it was a great feeling. And if you never have that feeling, you're never going to be able to garner the discipline to help you climb that mountain to mastering something. So you need to get rewards, and putting yourself in the place where you have to do a project of some sort that will last several months or longer is a great way to focus the mind. So stop postponing that idea that you have. And then as far as being alone, the reason people don't want to be alone is you have to confront yourself when you're alone. I meditate every morning. I've been doing it now for over 10 years. And you sit there and you try and empty the mind, and it's almost impossible. thoughts keep coming up over and over again, circling around over and over and over again, right? And so, sorry, you come to realize that these things that there are problems, things that are going on in your brain that you're not confronting. So if you're alone and you're not having a distraction, those circles of thoughts keep cropping up, and it's painful. It's not fun. There's no distraction. You have to sit there and look at yourself. You have to think of, wow, why am I obsessed with this person, with this particular emotional drama? Why am I always thinking about my parents and what they did to me, or what my girlfriend or boyfriend wasn't giving me? Why am I such a child and getting so emotional? It happens to me. And so when you're alone, you have to confront yourself. And that's the last thing you want to do, right? Because it can be often very painful, but it's very necessary. And so there's pain, but there's a reward in doing that, because if you do that, you become aware of yourself, you become aware of your flaws, so you know what to work on, you become aware of your weaknesses and your strengths, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of how I'd answer that.
So it sounds like there's a negative involved here, this initial challenge, but then you persist, you persevere through this, and you gain self-confidence, you gain self-respect in your ability to now do something that initially you may have been afraid to do, or you might have given up on, or surrendered to, or stopped altogether. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, for mastery, I interviewed several people who I considered contemporary masters to write the book. And one of them, I hope I don't have his name wrong, I think it was Jose Rodriguez. He is the last decorated Air Force pilot who, what an ace, the last decorated ace in the United States Air Force. And he told me, he's about five. I met him. He's about 5'6". He comes from Puerto Rico. He's not naturally gifted physically. So in the Air Force, when you went to pilot school, there were the golden boys, like in the Tom Cruise movie. They looked like Tom Cruise. They acted like Tom Cruise. He was the polar opposite. He was kind of short, squat. He had none of that. And he was intimidated when he first went to school, because there was like 100 students, and he was ranked like in the bottom 5. It looked like he was not going to succeed, and it was very cutthroat. And he remembered that when he was younger, growing up in Puerto Rico, he played football, American football, and he wanted to become the quarterback, but he was too short to be a quarterback. But he trained and practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced, and became a good enough passer, even though he was only 5'6". And they operated a kind of a wishbone, sort of an option type offense. He got really good at that. He became the quarterback. And he remembered, by just working harder than anybody else, by sitting in that weight room and pumping iron and practicing and throwing 1,000 passes, he became good. Well, I'm going to apply the same thing here. I'm going to get better than all these golden boys. I'm going to spend more time with the simulator. I'm going to force myself to train in the plane in actual flights, which was very painful. He explained to me that flying a jet plane like that is incredibly disorienting and hard on the body, and it makes you not want to do it. He forced himself over and over. He trained harder than anyone else, and he ended up in the top 5 of the graduating class and became a decorated, pilot. So the lesson is that you get these rewards, and if you can remember when you were younger and you had these rewards, I tell parents a lot that it's important that their children have those moments, because if you don't have that moment when you're a kid, you think that learning is just all pain, that getting good at something is just it's not worth it, right? You've got to build in a sense of there's progress. You get better at something, and it's fun the better you get at it. And it's so important that we have those kind of memories. If you never had it in childhood, it's difficult, but you need to get that in the present. You need to take up something where you see the rewards on a day-to-day level. you can be learning a foreign language, something I've always practiced because I found that incredibly rewarding, because it's kind of boring, you know. Of course, I kind of, I hate to say I'm sort of gifted for languages, but I worked very hard at it. But you start getting better, you can like go to the country and talk to people. You can read books in the language. You can, and you feel fantastic. You feel powerful, right? So you need those kind of moments in life, kind of giving you rewards for your effort. Otherwise, you'll never be able to surmount, get the energy up to actually get good at anything.
I've always been fascinated with the idea of viewing things through the lens of a child because it seems as if that so much of who we are as adults is a byproduct of those early experiences that we have as children. And I'm just curious to know, Robert, what your thoughts are on this process of being a parent and raising a child, and how to best shape that experience so it's positive and sets a child off in the right direction for their life.
Well, the number one thing is the most important thing for a child, and as we get older, is to know what you want in life, to know the career path that you were destined for. And I make a point in my book of saying that everybody is unique, in that our DNA that you have has never existed in the past and will never exist in the future. It's a unique imprint, the chromosomes that you have. Nobody else will ever have that exact kind of pairing. And so you were born with a reason, a purpose, which is to somehow find what makes you unique. And it's not just your genetics, it's also your experiences in life. Nobody else has had your parents. Nobody else has had your first 3 or 4 years or anything like that. So what makes you unique? What makes you different? And that is your source of power. That is, like Superman, that is your source of power. Mining what makes you different, not following what everybody else is doing. And the worst thing that parents can do to their children is to not respect that very critical law, and to say, I want my son or daughter, I want her to be a lawyer. I want him to be a doctor. I want him to make a lot of money. I got into business. I don't want my child to be poor. He better get into business, etc. I felt that when I was a kid, that my parents really wanted me to be like a doctor or a lawyer, kind of a typical Jewish family paradigm sort of thing, right? And it didn't fit me. And so your child is attracted to certain things. There's a great book, I think it's Howard Gardner, about the 5 or 6 frames of intelligence. And he says there are like 6 different forms of intelligence. Some of it has to do with mathematics and patterns. Some of it has to do with words and language. Some of it has to do with physical body movements and kinetics. Some of it has to do with social things. Everybody has one particular intelligence that is their strong point, that they're drawn to. There could be several, but there's usually one main one. For me, it was words and language. And you want to see that in your child. You want to recognize what it is and encourage that, even if it's not what you like, even if you don't think it's lucrative, even if you think it's not what you had intended, fantasized about them becoming. You have to respect their difference and their uniqueness. And if they're drawn to something, get them to practice it and get them to have those moments of reward. So if you force them to play soccer when they're not interested in soccer and they rebel, you're thinking you're doing a good thing because you're going to make them disciplined, but you don't realize what an incredible sin you're doing, because you're turning them off from learning, from practicing, from sports itself, right? You're making them, and it's not going to have the results that you think. So within reason, as long as their interest is not destructive, as long as there's something good about it, you need to encourage them and let them get those rewards and discipline from whatever that field is. If it's music, okay, get them a piano, get them lessons, and make them practice, because they're probably going to have moments where they don't feel like it. and let them experience that reward process that we've been talking about. That's the most important thing, is getting what I talked about with Cesar Rodriguez when he was playing college football. I had when I was trying to write when I was a kid, and I saw how I got better and better at it. You want your kid to have that. You want your kid to have a feeling of, this is something I love, and this is something that I'm going to come back to later, in years later. When I'm 18, 19, this is where you see your path. You feel like your destiny and your power lies in that direction. And pushing children into something that isn't natural to them is the worst thing you can do. So understanding and respecting that is by far the most important law of parenting, in my opinion.
I guess the one thing I have concern about is how do you draw the line between, say, helping that child identify what's of interest or what they have a natural inclination towards versus, say, maybe they are interested in something, but perhaps there's just a lack of discipline there, a lack of work ethic, a lack of a willingness to put in the work to actually manifest any kind of goal attached to that pursuit. How do you draw that line between knowing that there's an interest versus, okay, there's an interest here, but maybe they're not applying themselves enough.
Well, the child will indicate it by him or herself. So if you're, I give examples in my book, in Mastery in particular, of people who became very powerful and successful in their fields. I like to talk about Steve Jobs. He's 6 years old, and he passes by an electronics store in Sunnyvale where he grew up, and he's like, his eyes wide open. And it's not about the technology; it's about the design of these objects. He's transfixed by the beauty of these electronic objects. Right? I talk about Einstein getting a compass when he was like 3 or 4, and seeing the needle moving by some force that you can't see. He's like obsessed with unseen forces in nature. I talk about Martha Graham and going to her first dance theater performance when she's like 12 years old. Wow, her eyes light up. Children have those moments, and it's what you see them get excited and become very emotional about. And they love to do it. They're drawn to it. Okay, so they're drawn to music. Yeah. Okay, they're going to get bored with it. They're going to have moments where they don't want to practice, but you know that that's what they were drawn to, that's their inclination, right? Okay, I don't believe in exposing your child to everything that's out there, you know, because I feel like, let the child sort of find its way to what it excites itself. Yes, you can give it some guidelines, etc. You can set some parameters. You can see if it has to do with something physical in sports, or that has to do with, these different forms of intelligence. But they will show you what they're excited by what they're interested in, right? We've got the cliche of the helicopter parent. They're always hovering over. They're trying to direct everything the child does. They're filling up their day with 5 activities, soccer from 2 to 3, music lesson from 3 to 4, da da da. I never had that when I was a kid, and I would have hated that. Children need time on their own to find themselves, to work on their own inner life, on their own imagination. You need to encourage them also to play and to be as creative. And in a social situation, for sure, as you mentioned, is extremely important. So, a lot of kids now are very much, their source of pleasure and fun is by themselves with their video games, etc. And that's very negative. So getting them to be out on the streets, playing with their friends, doing and inventing things, and sparking their imagination. It's the difference between being an active child or a passive child. And a passive child is listening to mommy and daddy tell him what to do, tell her what to do, how to fill the day. It's being passive by having a video game in his or her face. And they're not engaging, they're not being active, they're not using their imagination, their own energy. You want them to be using their own energy and triggering their own imagination and inventing games, inventing things to do, and finding what they want to, books they want to read, and finding the sports that they're attracted to. Get your child to be active instead of imposing on them and turning them into these kind of addicted, passive little creatures.
Hmm. And just to zoom out from that more broadly, not just for children, but for us as adults as well, what do you think are some of the primary laws that govern the behavior that we all exhibit in these interpersonal relationships that we have, and these friend dynamics, family dynamics, these hierarchical arrangements that we deal with at work and just in life more generally?
Basically, I mean, I wrote a whole book on that subject. So, I'd advocate reading The Laws of Human Nature, which pretty much delves into that whole subject from 18 different angles. But to kind of summarize it in a few minutes, um, you're gifted as a human being we're social animals, and our source of our power is that we are the supreme social animal on the planet. Some might argue that ants are the supreme social animal, but I think we would get, we would believe, we honestly believe that we're probably, with our powers, etc. Okay, and with that comes a remarkable ability to understand other people. Psychologists call it theory of mind. And what it means is a child at a very early age, 2 years old, even younger sometimes, has the unique ability among animals of imagining what the other person is thinking. Now, we take that for granted because we use it all the time, but no other animal that we know, except perhaps dolphins and demonstrated perhaps in chimpanzees to some degree, have that ability, right? It's incredibly powerful, the ability to put yourself in the shoes, the body, the head of another person. And that is what you would call empathy. And I call it like high level empathy. It's sort of a visceral empathy. And it's a skill, it's a muscle that you can develop, and it becomes incredibly powerful as you get older. Now, children, as they get older, feel social pressure to kind of fit into a group, and they become more self-absorbed, as we all do as we get older, and less outer directed. So when you're 2 or 3 years old, you're very attuned to your mother or your father and their emotions and their moods. But then as you get older, you become less observant, you become more self-absorbed, right? So you need to turn that around, and you need to understand that social skill is a matter of a sensitivity, a fine-grained sensitivity to the psychologies, to the moods, to the experiences of other people. And you're not paying attention. You are not a very high-level social animal. You need to be aware of that. Okay, you need to be aware that most of the time, when you look at your spouse, when you look at your children or your boss, you're projecting your own emotions, your own phobias, your own childhood problems onto them. You're seeing reflections of your own emotional hangups, whatever. So you're not really looking at people, you're not really observing them, you don't really understand their experience and what makes them different. Okay, with that awareness, you now have to pay greater attention. But the problem is for us humans is it's not just a matter of listening better. Everyone says you have to listen better. Fine, that's very easy to say, but it's very hard to put into practice. The reason we don't listen to other people is we find ourselves more interesting than what the other person has to say. So while they're talking and blabbing on about their problems and their day, we're in our head and we're thinking, we're thinking about our own problems, our own issues, our own ideas that we want to tell them, because we find that more interesting than what they have to say. You're never going to become a good listener if you're trapped in that kind of paradigm. You need to flip it around and start thinking that other people are actually fascinating. So for instance, you've been married to this woman or man for 10 years. Tell yourself that you don't really know them. Begin with that premise. And now try and actually observe and listen with the extent where you cut off that interior monologue. And in the course of the day, your goal, or in an hour in a conversation, is to find out something new that you never understood or saw in them before, right? To start paying deeper attention and to pay attention to their nonverbal communication. I'm extremely a great believer in the power of that, and I have a whole chapter in the Human Nature book. But it's the fine level of your attention, how you're attuned to the look in their eye, to the tone in their voice, to when they get excited by certain subjects. Get them to talk about their childhood. Everybody loves to talk about their childhood and about special moments that happen, and notice any kind of excitement in the eyes or something that makes them very emotional, either good or bad, and start paying attention to these things that you never noticed before. And you start, as I said, with other things, it's like a skill that you learned and you're going to get rewards. And so it's the natural tendency is to react from what people are doing, to take it personal. That's very difficult to eradicate. It's one of the hardest things to eradicate, right? Particularly when it's your child or a spouse that you're so emotionally attached to. But you can develop it just like we developed our other skills that we talked about earlier by taking baby steps. So the next time you're interacting with this person that you have a lot of emotions between, whether it's a friend, a spouse, or a child, try to have a moment where you step back and go, all right, I'm not going to get emotional. It's not about me. It's nothing personal. I might understand that they have their own life and their own issue, and it's not about me. What is it that they're actually trying to express? And if you can just do that once a day with whomever it is, you'll start to see that it's actually very powerful. You'll have less drama, you'll have less arguments, you'll have less conflict in life. You know, on and on. As I said, I wrote over 500 pages on this subject. So there's so much more to go into, but these are kind of the first steps that I would talk about.
And Robert, I know you had a stroke some years ago, and that was a very dark experience for you. And before we close out, I'd just love to know more about what happened before that, what led up to the stroke, and what has the experience taught you now that you have some distance between the stroke up till now? What have been the takeaways for you, if any, and just the experience like for you now, having survived it?
Well, yeah, a little over 2 years ago, I had a stroke. I came this close to dying. I was driving a car. My wife, girlfriend at the time, was in the car, and she saw something very strange in my face. And she said, Robert, pull over, pull over. I go, what? Everything's fine. She's pull up. She like forced me to fucking pull the car over. And at that moment, I don't remember anything.
Wow.
She called 911, and I had had a stroke. And fortunately, there were several things. A, she called them right away. She knew something was wrong. She didn't wait to see what was happening. B, they came very quickly for whatever reason. And C, we were close to a hospital. And I was taken there, and I had a blood clot in my neck, which was causing no oxygen to go to the brain. I was essentially in a coma, and the doctors got rid of the clot. And then I was in a hospital for about a week, and then I've been through I'm still going through physical therapy because I still can't walk very well. I can't go out and take a hike or just sort of walk to some place because my walking is very crooked and weird.
Wow.
It's getting better, but it's still not there. It was a very humbling and traumatic experience. On the one hand, grateful to be alive, grateful to see the sun shining, grateful to be in California where it's pleasant out and the birds are chirping, and I get to write another book. On the other hand, I love taking hikes. I love swimming. I love getting on my bicycle and just going up into the hills. And all that was taken away from me in a flash. And I went from someone who was extremely active to someone who can barely do anything. It was very, very humbling and very difficult. And I'm still going through the difficulties of that. I know there are people who have it a lot worse than me, so I don't want to over dramatize it. But I see people walking up the street where I am, and sometimes my heart just bleeds because, God, that was me over 2 years ago. I just wish I could have that back. So I don't ask for a lot. So on the one hand, I've had to become more patient than I normally am. I'm not a very patient person. I am when it comes to writing a book, But when it comes to getting things done or doing, I'm very independent, and I like being able to do things, and I'm not patient when it comes to that. So I've had to develop it. I've had to develop skills where every day I tell myself that it's worth being alive. Because to be honest with you, there have been moments where I go, I don't even know if I want to be alive, because the things that gave me so much joy, I can't do anymore. So I have to struggle, and I have to tell myself, no, it's better that you're alive. It's better that your brain is still there, that you can write another book. So I have to go through a process every single day, practically, of committing myself to being alive and to seeing why it's worth it and the joys that I can find. And it's particularly in writing my next book, which is kind of keeping me going in a way. And, when it comes to your mortality, the thing is, it's the one reality in your life. We can argue about many different things, but we can't argue the fact that we're all going to die at some point, right? And it's when we feel in our bodies that we're so when we feel in our bodies that we're alive, we feel our blood moving, we feel everything about it. But death is also a feeling, and I know that from my stroke, because I felt it in my body. It was a feeling in my bones. It was kind of a softness in my body, and I still have it. I still feel it from time to time. So it's like a sensation that you have, and you have it sometimes when you're about to fall asleep, and your mind and you go and drift into an unconscious state, and there's a moment of kind of a falling that, if you thought about it deeply, is a little bit similar to what it might be like to die, you know? And so it's the worst thing that you want to think about, right? I've talked about other things about being alone, set of things that you don't want to think about. This is the last thing anybody wants to think about, right? But it's the most important thing to think about, because it gives you a power. So if you are avoiding the thought of your mortality, you're creating all kinds of anxieties that sit inside of you day after day after day. You're not aware of it. You're not aware of the fact that you're afraid to change jobs. You're afraid to break off a relationship. You're afraid to take on a project, because you actually haven't confronted your own mortality. You're not dealing with this elemental fear, and it's causing all kinds of little fears in your life. You're afraid to take a leap into something unknown, because it's a small kind of death. Leaping into something unknown, taking on a project you've never done, going into a relationship. It's a little form of the unknown. It's a little form of death. So confronting it will begin to relieve that kind of well of anxiety that sits in you. The other thing is, you realize that your life is short. Okay, you might be young. You might be in your 30s. I imagine you're in your 30s. Are you?
I'm going to be 30 this August.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. All right. So you think, wow, I've got all this time in front of me. I'm about to be 30. I'm going to, I don't have to think about that. You could die tomorrow. You can get the coronavirus tomorrow. You could get hit by a car. Life is brutal. It could end tomorrow. And with that awareness means, I better get things done.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to write that book. I wanted to do these things. I don't want to die with nothing accomplished. I don't have much time. I better get my act together. Also, it's amazing to be alive, right? It makes you appreciate that tomorrow could be gone. So it makes everything more intense, right? So the fact that you're looking out at the sky and you see other people and you're able to do things, normally you take all of that for granted, and you're kind of sleepwalking through life. But when you know that tomorrow could be taken away from you, like if I had known the day before that I was going to lose everything with my stroke, it would have changed me a lot. I would not, my walks would have been different, okay. So being aware of that will make you, it'll make you aware of the shortness of life. It'll give you an appreciation for life. It'll help relieve some of your general anxieties. And finally, it will connect you more deeply to other people, because it's the one thing that we share. We're all mortal. So you might confront somebody. Let's say there's a boss that you don't really like in your office. It rubs you the wrong way, etc. If you look at that person and you start seeing, he or she is mortal. They're also dealing with the same issues that I am. They're afraid of dying. They're going to die one day soon as well, at some point. It kind of humanizes them. as opposed to turning them into kind of an object that you project all your hatred and your fears upon. It makes people very human, and it makes you appreciate them. So when you look at your spouse, or particularly your spouse or whomever, eh, seeing the fact that they could very well be taken away from you tomorrow, really increases your appreciation of them now, and all the moments and all the good things about them, and things that you don't take for granted. So it makes you more grateful. So I've listed 4, maybe 5 powers confronting your mortality will do, and there are others. And it's the 18th chapter, the last chapter of the Laws of Human Nature. So it's extremely important. And I wrote that chapter 2 months before I had my stroke. So it was very ironic that I wrote a chapter on that, and then the gods were like playing some funny game with me and making that almost happen. But it all happens for a reason, and I think in the end it'll be one of the most interesting and maybe positive and productive experiences of my life, ironically.
Robert, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I just have one more question. I'd love to know more about this new book that you're working on, and just hear more about what the story is there behind the book, and what's got you excited about it.
Well, it's something I talked about in that 18th chapter, which is about the sublime,
Yep.
and about how your awareness of death can lead to this kind of some of these powers that I was just talking about. And I call that kind of power sublime. And I'm writing a book on that because I want to make people aware. I think people are too immersed in day-to-day affairs, in the banality of everyday life, that they're not conscious of how insanely amazing it is to be alive. And all of the factors about our brain, about the universe, not about telemarketing. That is not sublime. That is the anti-sublime. Um, but I wrote a chapter, the first chapter, on like the cosmic sublime, just the nature of the Big Bang theory and how our little planet evolved, and just the fact of being alive, the brain, things about childhood, because children are constantly having these sublime experiences. And I've created a whole philosophy around it. And I'm trying to make it very therapeutic. It's not an intellectual book. It's an emotional book. It's about a book that's going to help you feel more energy, feel more creative, feel more imaginative, feel more connected to the world itself, and bring back. I say that children have a more intense experience than we do as adults, because everything around them is exciting and full of curiosity and wonder. And then the loss of that as we get older is the source of our pain and misery. It's what makes us turn to drugs. It's what makes us turn to alcohol. It's what makes us turn to porn addictions, et cetera, et cetera. We've lost that intensity that we once had, and we try to find it in some other way. And you can find it on your own through these experiences that I'm going to take you through, that I think can really transform your life. So I'm just beginning the writing of the book, but those sort of the general drift of it.